Hello, hi, it's the Rev Pipster here. There's a couple of things I want to add, put in as a response to this video of KingJamesVideoman. Lies in your false Bible, King James versus other versions, and he's particularly picking on the New American Standard Bible here. I'm going to do this in reverse order because I'm going to get the tricky one out the way first. Obviously this guy is a King James Onlyist, and haven't quite worked out whether he's a King James Onlyist who takes his authority for the King James based upon the Hebrew and Greek texts they're using, the Textus Receptus and the etc. and the Masoretic text, or if he is a Sam Gipp, Peter Ruttman Knight, King James Onlyist. The King James Bible itself is the final authority, as most King James Onlyists do tend to be if they haven't thought about what they're saying very much. He doesn't go back to quoting the Hebrew and stuff here. Let's start hang on with 2 Samuel 21, 19-21, and he brings it's a battle with war with the Philistines against Gob, and it says in the New American Standard, Elihan the son of Jair-Oregim the Bethlehemite killed Goliath the Gittite, whose staff was like a weaver's beam, his staff was like a weaver's beam as his spear, and he calls on the fact that we know, and yes we do, yes, Goliath was slain by David many years previously when David was just a young man. He took up 5 stones from the 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his catapult, and knocked Goliath out with 1 stone, and then cut his head off with Goliath's own sword. Now I always take that as a sign of faith from David, an act of faith from David. We know that Goliath, being a giant, had 5 brothers. David took 5 stones out. David was quite happy to take them all on. He had such faith in God. And of course the other giants soon fell. But here we have a quotation from the New American Standard Bible that says it was Goliath who was killed by Eliapham, the son of Jair-Oregim. And of course the King James only man, KingJamesVideoman, says that the New American Standard is lying. It's a lie because they're not quoting the right text. They're using a corrupt text, and it says that the King James Bible translates it correctly, that the Bethlehemite slew the brother of Goliath the Hittite. That is confirmed in the 1611 text as it is in the Blaney revision. It is. However, firstly, are the New American Standard translators hiding anything here? Well, the New American Standard translators, and I've got my NASB study Bible here. Firstly, they acknowledge in the footnotes that there could have been a copyist error. There's a variant, a Hebrew variant here. They acknowledge this in the here, that because they say it said killed Goliath the Gittite. When they say an earliest copyist, they talk about an error in the copying of the Hebrew text, not the copying of the NASB. They actually had a text which had a variant in there. The words are unclear in the text they were using, and they've possibly mixed up Lammy, the brother of. They've possibly mixed that up here, and so what they've done is when they translated what was in front of them, they've copied that exactly. They've translated it exactly as it reads, as makes sense to them according to the translation process, the principles of translation the New American Standard would follow. So they have translated accurately, as far as they're concerned, what was in front of them with the text they were using, and they've made a full note of the variant in the study Bible and also in the margins. There's a literal translation acknowledging the variant, and of course pointing, just as the 1611 King James Bible does, points to the parallel passage, the cross-reference in Chronicles chapter 20 verse 5. 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5. Okay, so they're not hiding anything here. They're not hiding anything. I'm not saying it was deliberate or anything like that, and I'm not going to say this is deliberate too. But you'll notice if you've got a 1611 text and the Blaney revision, a modern edition of the King James, that word, the brother of, is in italics. It's in italics, and when it's in italics in the King James, what that refers to is that exact phrase isn't in the original. Those exact words aren't in the original. They've added it to the English text to assist them with the translation process. That is clearly put. It's not always clearly put in every single King James Bible, not in any Bible at all. It's not clearly put in there at all when they add words. But some of the study Bibles, etc., do make this plainly clear. That when you see something that's in italics, it's English words added to make sense of the English translation. What happens in the translation process from going from Hebrew into English, or from Latin into English, whatever it might be, that is in there to actually make it grammatical sense. The problem I have with what he's actually implying here is that the translators of the New American Standard have deliberately lied and not given an explanation, okay, from the New American Standard Study Bible, okay, and it would be in my standard copy of the New American Standard. It is in here. The explanation is in here given. Okay, there is a variant reading and actually say why they believe that to be the case. In the King James Bible, certainly from what he's quoting here, because he hasn't posted up here the term "the brother of" in italics, which is in the King James. You know from the translation process and the publication of it that that phrase isn't in there. It's been added to make grammatical sense in English. Whether it's been added to actually say it's got to be, they've added to the Hebrew to correct the Hebrew, I can't actually say. I don't think they're doing it to correct the Hebrew. They've probably taken a wild guess and decided it's got to be plainly obvious, perhaps. I'm just making a wild guess myself, being devil's advocate for the King James translators, because I don't think they were acting to try and be divine or anything. They've added that to make grammatical sense, taking into account that we know Goliath had 4 other brothers, and this was one of them, and it wasn't the battle where David had. So they added the brother of. They weighed up the pros and cons and put this in. Probably looked at the Latin Vulgate, double checked that, double checked the Hebrew manuscripts they did have, the Hebrew copies they did have, looked at the other translations they were referring to, and said, let's put the brother in. They couldn't really put a variant in because they, at that time, possibly because there just wasn't the evidence to say it was an actual variant in there to actually put. So they put it in. The term "the brother of," taking into account what 1 Chronicles says, they probably took an estimated guess. And yes, it's probably true. It is true because Chronicles confirms it. It was one of Goliath's brothers. It wasn't Goliath himself. Did the New American Standard translators deliberately lie? Actually, perhaps they were more honest. They said, we're following certain set principles of translation. We see the manuscript, because they're looking at manuscripts as well, taking manuscripts into account as well as printed versions of the Old Testament, etc. We're taking all this into account. Let's be honest and let's translate it as we see it on the manuscript we're using. Okay, the King James translators weren't actually translating from original manuscripts. They weren't. They were using other people's printed editions, etc. So this is what's happened here, and that's what happens in translation. I know, because I studied the subject. I've literally just completed my final module on translating text into English. That's the sort of thing that happens in translations, and the translators have made an educated guess, which they're quite entitled to do. But nonetheless, the King James Bible, the 1611 text, and also the more modern versions, put it in italics. It's not in exactly the same manuscripts they were using either. It's just that we have certain King James Bibles, and I've got one as well, that don't acknowledge this in the margins, etc. But they do acknowledge it by putting it in italics. So that's that issue out of the way. Let's look quickly at Daniel chapter 3. Do we need to go back to the Hebrew and Greek on this one? Is it a translation issue? It's funny that the King James 1611 text translates, spells Son of God in the 1611 text with a small s. Obviously the 1611, the spellings are different on many occasions to what's in the modern English Bibles, because they've of course been Latinized, been classicalized, which is what all the part of the Blaney revision was all about, standardizing the spellings, etc. So you've got Son of God. Well, it's actually in the Old English it's spelled S-O-N-N-E, Son of God with a small s, and then God with a big capital G. The New American Standard, as King James Videoman rightly says, translates that as Son of the Gods. Who was speaking? What has actually happened? Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego got chucked into the fire for doing what? Refusing to worship the golden statue of the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar. The pagan god king decided that he was going to be worshipped alongside all the other gods. He was going to give them worship, I guess, and as long as people worshipped him, he would share it out amongst the other gods, because he believed in many gods. He was a pagan, a polytheistic pagan, and he saw a divine being. He didn't get a revelation. It wasn't like Saul, who suddenly saw a vision of Jesus and said, and Jesus said to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Or in this case, Nebuchadnezzar, what are you doing picking on my boys? It wasn't the case of that at all. Okay, he saw a divine being, and so he said, let's shed some light on the subject. He said, this looks like the Son of God. It's a man. He must have come, or a form of man. He must have come from the gods here. Okay. Just as some people actually do translate the New Testament, when the Roman centurion says, surely this was the Son of God. This battle took place in his mind. He was a pagan. He was a polytheist. And all of a sudden there's this miracle during the crucifixion. A man dies after just 6 hours on the cross. And there's an earthquake and everything else when he dies as well. No one should be dying after just 6 hours on the cross. And especially no one should be saying, right, that's it, I've done it, it's finished, into your hands I commend my spirit, boom. No one should do that. Only one who has the power to lay down his own life, and as we found 3 days later, the power to take it up again. But here we go. It's not a deliberate lie. It's not a deliberate deception. A pagan king is exploiting his amazement at a miracle. The King James translators translate it Son of God, capital S, capital G. Well, they chose to translate it that way. In the context of it, the NASB translator is probably more correct because of who is speaking. He didn't have a revelation of the Messiah. Secondly, whenever did Jesus Christ appear in the Old Testament? When Jesus was speaking to the Jews in the temple in Jerusalem and basically said, my Father is working and I also work, the Jews didn't turn around and say, oh, hang on, is it you? Were you in the fire? Were you in the fire? Were you the fourth one in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego? It was you, wasn't it? They weren't expecting a second person of the Trinity. Since when did the Jews ever expect or have revealed to them, prior to the coming of Jesus on the earth, that God was a triune God? They never had it revealed to them. This was a revelation from the Old Testament. And so once again, the King James Onlyist position of saying that Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, is being removed from the Old Testament of the King James by his new translation, that's in error, because the Jews didn't believe in a triune God, as even though the language suggested it was plural. They believed it was Shema Israel, Yehovah Elohim, Yehovah Echad, one. They believed it was one being, not three persons in one being. They hadn't had that revelation. They certainly weren't expecting it. And we know from what Jesus said that the Father is a spirit, so has no image, and the Holy Spirit is a spirit, so has no image. As Jesus is revealed to us in the New Testament, we now can look back into the Old Testament and we can see the signs, the times that Yahweh appeared in a human form, like to Abraham, etc. We know that that is Jesus appearing, but there's nothing in the text, and nothing in the text referring to the Son of God. That was a revelation from the New Testament. So once again, King James Onlyist position here, accusing the modern versions, is unjustified. Thank you very much for listening.